Chapter 1: The Splitting Sky. The sky tore open, not with thunder, but with a dry, silver sound, like silk cut too fast. The seam widened, edges fraying, until the blue itself seemed to give way. Ash drifted down in slow feathers. First a few, then a veil. Fields dulled to gray in a single breath, as though the world had grown weary of its own colors.
Sir Edrin Vale hauled the reins tight. His horse stamped and snorted, breath smoking in the cold. Even the beast sensed it. Something had broken that should never break. Vale kept his jaw set, but his eyes lifted once to the sky, a frown tightening there despite himself. You never spoke of this, he thought toward the High One who had raised him, who had taught him every oath and given him his knightship. Did you not see it coming?
The child clung to his belt, face pressed into his side. Edrin turned in the saddle, long enough to glimpse her eyes, blue and wide, cheeks streaked with soot. Too small to name what she was seeing, but not too small to feel the wrongness in her bones. She looked at him, eyes wide. "What's happening?" they seemed to ask. Edrin swallowed hard. "I don't know," he whispered, wishing he did. Above, the seam yawned wider. Beyond it was nothing. No stars, no light, only a flat hollow, a wound in heaven with no blood left to give. His hand went to the sword at his side. Habit, not hope. Steel could cut men, beasts, even the monsters sung about in taverns. But not this. Still, its weight steadied him, and steadiness was worth more than hope. He swung the child into the saddle before him. "Hold fast." His own voice came thin against the silence. He turned the horse toward St. Bran. The monastery crouched on the ridge, stone upon stone, the only place in these hills that still remembered how to stand. Ash clung to his lashes. He blinked, once, twice. For a heartbeat, he thought the seam had doubled. It had. Out of nowhere, a second slit ripped across the sky.
Narrow at first, then widening, directly above the monastery. Sparks and flecks of ash sifted down, like embers shaken from a broken forge. Edrin's gut clenched. "Not there," he breathed, the words breaking rough in his throat. "Not the monastery."
The words breaking rough in his throat. The horse froze, shivering under him. The child's grip tightened. And then the wind itself died, perfectly, offensively still. Ash drifted sideways, then stopped in the air, weightless. A world holding its breath. Edrin drew steel anyway. Habit, not hope. Chapter 2: A Flight. The monastery of St. Bran rose squat against the ridge, its stone blackened by centuries of wind and ash. Narrow windows glimmered like slits, and the bell tower leaned slightly, as if stooping under the weight of prayer. They said St. Bran had been a firekeeper once, a smith who died in the forge's flames. Now he was venerated as patron of endurance and ash, his effigies always painted with soot along the brow. In the villages, people swore oaths by his name, not out of reverence, but because he was thought to hear even curses. Edrin reined his horse at the foot of the monastery, the child clinging close against his side. For a heartbeat, they simply stared, as if measuring the silence that seeped from its walls. The gates of St. Bran stood ajar. Ash had gathered in their seams, frosting the hinges, muting what should have been a grind of old iron into silence. Edrin pressed a palm to the wood and pushed. The doors shifted, without complaint, opening onto the monastery's dim nave. Edrin stepped through the gate, the child pressed close against his side. Darian was waiting inside, a lanky novice in borrowed mail, his eyes brightening with relief at the sight of them. The armor hung loose on him, more noise than protection, but he straightened as if it mattered. He stepped toward the knight with a hesitant reverence, as though to unburden him. Edrin shifted the girl into his arms. Darian nodded, laying a hand briefly on the knight's shoulder. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, Both men felt it, a sense of relief, as though they had come home. Rows of villagers hunched in pews, a smith still wearing his apron, scrubbing soot into the cloth as if the stain would ever lift, a grandmother clutching the key to her house so tight the iron teeth cut her palm, a farm boy with a split lip worrying at the flagstones with his boot. Others shifted restlessly, some glancing upward toward the sky, others staring at the night with questions they didn't dare voice. Their silence had a weight to it, as though sound had been declared forbidden. At the far pew, Brother Anselm scribbled, hunched like a crow over his parchment. Ink bled across the page in smears, lines running into one another until they lost meaning. He didn't stop to correct them. His eyes were red-rimmed, fever-bright, but his quill scratched on, desperate to catch words before they fled. He glanced up only once, and his voice cracked in the stillness. "More refugees coming?" "From the road," Edrin said. "From everywhere." Anselm gave a curt nod and bent back to his page, as though confirmation of the world's ruin was just another line for the record.
Edran moved further in, boots whispering on stone worn smooth by centuries. Darian and the child stumbled beside him, nearly tripping on the flagstone. Darian caught her under the arm and set her straight, but the girl barely seemed to notice. Darian's gaze stayed fixed on the cruciform beams above,
where the faintest draft stirred old cobwebs into quivering threads. Someone stirred in the shadow near the altar. For a moment, Edrin thought it another villager too dazed to speak, but when the figure lifted her head, her gaze was not dazed at all. It was sharp, searching. She stepped into the half-light. Her cloak was stained with travel dust, her dark hair tangled with grit. She let her hand rest on the carved wood of the pew, her fingers moving along the grain as though she were tracing hidden script. Murmurs stirred among the pews. "Hisara," a few whispered, as though the name itself might burn their tongues. Her eyes tilted upward, though the rafters blocked the sky. "Tonight," she said, "the sun closes its eye." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a long breath, no one moved. Even Anselm's quill stilled above the page. The child shifted against Darian's side, but no sound left her. Edrin opened his mouth to demand what she meant, who she was, when the monastery bell began to move. The clapper swung. The bronze quivered. Yet no tone rang, no peal, no clangor. Each swing promised a roar that never came. Instead, a dull, crushing pressure rolled through their ribs. A vibration that made the chestbone hum, the marrow ache. People clutched their ears by instinct and found nothing to block. The child screamed, but no sound left her mouth. Her jaw stretched wide, face twisting, yet the only noise was the bell's mute pulse. Darian pulled her back against his side, staring wild-eyed at the swinging bronze. "I can feel it in my teeth," he whispered. The silent toll deepened, each swing pressing harder against the air. The smith fell to his knees. The grandmother dropped her key with a sharp clatter that felt louder than thunder. The door on the far side of the nave creaked open. Through it came Morgile. Her cloak smelled of smoke. Her hair was dusted gray with ash. Her hands were blackened to the palm lines, raw where soot had eaten skin. "Bar the gates," she said, voice steady though her pupils flicked quick as sparks. "I'll try the fire." She looked straight at Edrin. He had seen her before, once, long ago when she had served a baron who thought witchcraft could win wars. Her eyes were the same, unanchored, seeing too many layers.
Edron clenched his hand until the leather of his glove creaked. He had broken sieges. He had faced men who called themselves monsters. This was not an enemy. This was her. Someone he had known once, though he could not name the place or time. Memory wavered, leaving only the sense that absence had stepped into her shape.
"Darian," he said. A novice straightened, jaw just sprouting shadow. Eyes still bright with the kind of courage that hadn't yet met regret. He swallowed hard as the bell swung above them without voice. The rescued child pressed her face into Darian's side, trembling. Darian looked at Edrin, waiting, for orders, for assurance, for something steadier than silence. "Stay close," Edrin said. The bell swung on, noiseless as snowfall. Chapter 3. The Echo of Fire.
Morgale knelt on the cold stone and poured a circle of ash and salt with slow, deliberate hands. Her soot-stained fingers trembled only once. The villagers pressed back against the pews, whispers darting between them like startled birds.
"The witch brings ruin," muttered the smith, his blackened knuckles clenching. "She'll call the fire onto us," the grandmother rasped, clutching her house key to her chest.
The rescued girl whimpered, pulling at Darian's sleeve. Morgale ignored them all. She spoke the old words, syllables that seemed to sink into the stones instead of echoing in the air. Flame licked up from the circle. Not orange, not gold, black, like a shadow that had learned to burn. It writhed upward, silent, its edges fraying into air. The crowd recoiled. A woman cried out, tried to stamp at it, but her boot struck only stone. The fire gave no heat, no crackle. It was nothing, and it burned anyway. Morgale tossed in a splintered chair leg. The wood didn't char. It vanished, crumbled into gray dust that refused to fall, as though gravity itself had turned its face away. Several villagers crossed themselves. One spat on the floor. Another pressed his palms flat to his ears, as though sound might return if he begged hard enough. Edron stepped forward, voice rough. "What has happened to the sky?" Morgale did not look up. "The axioms are inverted," she murmured. "What rises now falls, what burns erases." On her palms, ash lines bloomed into sigils, patterns Edron dimly recognized from old chapel glass, but reversed, like mirrors choosing the wrong side of truth. She flinched at the sting, but did not let go of the words. Beside her, Ysara lifted her hands. The same faint marks lay there too, as though they had always been waiting beneath her skin.
The crowd gasped. "Twice marked," someone whispered. "Cursed," said another. Ysara's eyes stayed fixed on the black flame. "It doesn't come from here," she said softly. "It presses in, like the sky itself has split, and something waits on the other side." The villagers broke. The crowd gasped. "Twice marked," someone whispered. "Cursed," said another. Ysara's eyes stayed fixed on the black flame. "It doesn't come from here," she said softly. "It presses in, like the sky itself has split, and something waits on the other side." The villagers broke.
The smith surged forward, iron dark fists raised. A younger man wrenched up a pew slat like a cudgel. A mother clutched her child and screamed, end it, before it takes us all." Edron's voice cut through like steel drawn from a sheath. "Hold." He planted himself between Morgale and the mob, gauntlet lifted. His shadow split the firelight, steady where theirs flailed. "Not another step," he commanded. "If the sky itself is broken, you'll have answers. Not a riot." The villagers faltered, breath heaving, fear twisting into sullen obedience. None dared test the knight's tone. Darian's hand was clamped on his sword hilt, knuckles pale. His face twisted, torn between fear and something else. Then he gave a startled cry as if burned, snatching his hand back from the hot iron. "It's hot," he whispered, voice thin with awe. Edrin frowned. "It's a hilt, not a hearth." Darian nodded quickly, but his eyes lingered on the blade. The fire burned on, black, silent, erasing. With each flicker, the nave seemed to hollow, the stone less certain beneath their feet. Shadows bent toward the circle as if listening, and still Morgale's voice pressed on, words sinking deeper, opening something that had already begun to open itself. From the archway staggered Brother Anselm. His robes were askew, ink smears dark on his fingers, a half-written scroll clutched tight in his fist. Letters bled from the parchment, running like fresh wounds, trailing down his wrist in black rivulets. His voice shook, but the words carried, "A messenger. He bleeds letters."
Chapter 4. The Call. The messenger lay arched on a trestle table in the monastery's refectory, body shuddering with each rasp of breath. It was the sound of the bellows with a hole in it, air pulled in, escaping too soon. His skin was carved, not hacked, not torn, but cut with deliberate care. lines clean as ink strokes. Across his shoulders, runes gleamed wet, black fluid welling from them. The smell was sharp, metallic, laced with the faint bite of frost. Darian gagged and looked away. That's not blood. Brother Anselm leaned close, fascinated and horrified both. Ink, he whispered. He touched the edge of the trestle where it pooled. The drops slid into shapes as they fell, curling into half letters before they splattered. The messenger's lips cracked apart. The dead city, he breathed. Caldrith. The crown lies there. His voice broke, rattled, then steadied for a moment of desperate will. They said it could heal. Edrin bent closer. Who sent you to get the crown? The man's throat spasmed. His mouth opened, black spittle bubbling on his tongue, but no words came. Ysera's eyes did not blink. She watched him as though listening beyond the flesh, into the hollow his voice had left behind. He speaks true, she murmured. The words come from a mouth that no longer belongs to him. Ink seeped across the trestle, letters collapsing into stains. Brother Anselm's quill scratched furiously, capturing the phrases. But when he lifted the page, his stomach lurched. His careful lines had rearranged themselves. The crown chooses blood, the script declared, neat and merciless in his own hand. The rest, his earlier words, had migrated, reshaped into new sentences, like soldiers shuffling ranks under a different commander. The ink hadn't flowed from my thought, he whispered, horrified, but from something using me as reed. Lie, Anselm muttered after a moment. Then softer, or the only truth left. Morgale flexed her hands, watching the ash sigils burn faintly on her palms. If the world is inverted, night, then even old warnings become invitations. Perhaps the crown was never meant to be touched. Or perhaps now it must. We go, Edrin said. His voice was iron. At dusk, Ysera's gaze flicked to the slit of sky visible through a broken window. Ash whirled against the light. Night, she said without looking at him. Dusk has already happened. The sun began closing its eye an hour ago. A shiver ran through Anselm. He turned back to his journal. On the first page, his own name, Brother Anselm of St. Bran, was faint. He rubbed at his eyes, blinked. The letters thinned further, fading like smoke, as if the book itself were deciding it had never needed him. At the door, Darian shifted, hand white-knuckled on his sword hilt. The warmth pulsed there again. Steady as a heartbeat, not his own. Once, twice, a faint singe stung his palm. He drew a sharp breath and looked to Edrin, but said nothing. The silence after the messenger's last breath felt heavier than his dying. Chapter 5. The Pact. The altar stone of St. Bran was cracked clean through. Ash gathered in a split like gray stitching that had failed. Beeswax stains ghosted the corners. Someone had once polished this surface as if polish could hold a world together. Edrin stepped up onto the chancel and set his gauntlet flat to the stone. The leather creaked. The hush of the nave pressed in. No bell, no birds, only breath. By my oath, he said. His voice did not echo. It landed on the rock and stayed there, a weight. I go to Caldrith. I will bring back the crown. The refugees huddled in the pews, like a dark shoreline. The smith with soot in his knuckles, the grandmother hiding her bleeding palm in her sleeve. The boy with the split lip, chewing air, as if sound might return if he practiced enough. The smith barked a bitter laugh. And what then, knight? You'll fetch a circlet from a dead city, and the sky will stitch itself whole? Oaths don't mend stone. Edrin's jaw tightened, but his gauntlet did not lift. No, he said. But men must go where stone has already broken. If nothing else, the path will not be left to silence. The hush shifted. Someone shushed the smith, but no one rebuked him. Morgale climbed the step next. The soot on her hands had worn into her skin. The ash lines on her palms had become her own lifelines. She pressed them to the stone, where Edrin's gauntlet had rested. "Then I go with him," she said. Her voice was raw, torn by smoke. "Not as shadow, not as shield. Equal." Ysara came after, her cloak dragging ash. She bent, and when her lips touched the altar, a flake of stone came away, lodging against her mouth. She did not spit it out. "For the sake of those who cannot," she whispered, "for the children who cannot follow." The boy with the split lip began to cry, not loud, but steady, like a roof dripping. Darian was next. He had not meant to stand, but his legs moved, and once moving, they did not stop. He placed the flat of his sword to the crack. The steel trembled in his hands. "I will not swear lightly," he said, "but I will not let them go alone." At the last, Brother Anselm stepped forward. His robes were dusted with ash, his ink-stained fingers twitching as if still clutching an invisible quill. He laid one trembling palm on the broken stone. "The words are failing," he murmured. "If you walk into Caldrith, someone must carry them still. Then let it be me." The 5 of them stood before the fractured altar, the vow lying between them like iron cooling in a forge. Outside, the ash fell soundless. The bell did not ring. Chapter 6. Ashbourne. They marched before dawn. The ash fell in slow, feathery snow, but it carried no chill. Each fleck that touched skin melted into nothing, leaving no wet trace, no stain. It was like being touched by absence. The road to Caldrith wound through hollow fields and broken fences until it spilled into the village of Grellin, or what had been a village. The thatched roofs had collapsed inward, timbers jutting like ribs. Doorways gaped black, some still holding hinges though no doors. The well stood dry in the square, its bucket rotting half-raised on a frayed rope. On the fence posts, chickens sat stiff, eyes open, wings tucked. They had not rotted, they had simply stopped. Darian shifted uneasily, hand on his hilt. "Where are the people?" Edrin didn't answer. His gaze caught on a bowl overturned in the dust. Oats spilled, still clumped with milk that had not soured. Beside it, a doll with one arm torn away leaned against a step. He felt the prickle at the back of his neck that told him not to breathe too loud. Ysara halted mid-square, head cocked, as though listening to something under the ground. "They're waiting," she whispered. Darian's voice cracked. "For what?" The answer came from the well, a groan of rope. Then gray shapes uncoiled, dragging themselves up and over the stones like smoke with bones inside. Eyeless, sharp-edged, their forms flared and shifted, never whole but always too human. They rose silent, their mouths fixed open as though they were screaming without sound. Ashbourne. They moved without noise, sliding across the square. Dust puffed beneath their steps, but gave no sound either. As if the earth conspired with them. "Shields!" Edrin barked,
the sound of command cutting the hush. His sword rasped free, blessed steel flashing pale in the ashlight. The first wraith lunged. He swung hard. For an instant, the resistance was like cutting through frozen reeds, and then it burst into drifting flakes, scattering in gray clouds that stung the eyes. Where his blade fell, the ash on the ground rippled outward in a ring, as though the strike had weight beyond steel. Another Ashbourne lunged from the left. Darian barely raised his shield in time, the impact rattling up his arm, though the creature's limbs had no weight.
"Hold!" Edrin shouted. "They fall to steel!" "They don't fall at all,"
Darian gasped, arm shaking.
The shield burned cold where it met the Ashbourne, a frost print spreading before fading. Morgale stepped forward, eyes hard. She drew black fire down her arm and flung it in a sharp arc. The flame tore 2 wraiths from chest to spine, erasing them mid-step, leaving nothing but air. Her own skin burned. The circle of sigils on her palm lit with a dark heat. She gritted her teeth, hissed through clenched jaw, and threw again. The fire came, the erasure took them, but blood welled from her palm where skin split. "Stop!" Anselm cried, clutching his book. "You'll kill yourself." The pages of his journal fluttered in windless air, ink bleeding faintly across the margins as though the words were trying to escape. She ignored him. The well belched more shapes. Ysera stood on its lip, eyes rolled white, her voice a harsh whisper. They want breath. They smell the heat of it. Her words brushed the air cold. Darian felt it freeze his lungs for a heartbeat, as though speech itself could thin the air. Then don't give it, Edrin roared, cleaving another into motes. Darian raised his sword. His hand shook. The hilt burned, heat licking his palm like it knew him. His pulse beat faster, but the sword had its own pulse. Steady, strong, seductive. For a moment, Edrin's back was outlined in silver. Perfect, vulnerable. The whisper slithered inside his skull. Cut him. Make room for yourself. His breath froze. Darian! Edrin bellowed. Swinging around, strike! The shout snapped him. He swung, blade biting a wraith lunging from his flank. Ash exploded around him, but his hand trembled after. His arm tingled as though the strike had missed the right target. The motes clung to his gauntlet longer than to the others, as though the Ashborn knew him. Ysera's head jerked toward the sky. More, she breathed. Too many. We must end it fast. Form line, Edrin barked, pulling the group together.
Shields locked, Morgale burning, Anselm clutching his useless quill as though he could write the world back into sense. The Ashborn pressed, silent but endless, until suddenly, emptiness. The last one broke against Edrin's shield and dissolved into motes that hung in the air and fell like dust.
The square lay still. Ash clung to armor, to lashes, to lips. No one moved. Not one of the wraiths had made a sound. Darian dropped to one knee, chest heaving. His hand was still locked on his hilt, as if afraid to let go. Edrin clapped him on the shoulder once, firm. Good strike, squire. Darian nodded. He didn't tell him that his palms still tingled, that it longed to turn the blade sideways, to finish the swing he hadn't dared. The chicken stared. The doll leaned. The air smelled of iron and ash. Chapter 7. The Betrayer. The rope snapped. It didn't crack so much as go slack. One instant taut across Edrin's glove, the next weightless, falling in a lazy curve that had no right to exist above a gulf with no depth. Sister Mael's eyes met his as she dropped. They were wide and terribly calm. Her mouth made the shape of a prayer. Edrin lunged, caught her wrist for a heartbeat, leather biting bone, and the black below accepted her without ripple, like water that forgot how to be wet. His fist closed on nothing. His oath rang in his skull like an empty bell. The rope's end dangled clean-cut, not frayed, not torn. For a moment, he only stared at it, the fibers swaying in the air. And memory pressed against him. Mael in the village, when Morgale had stumbled from the fire, skin blistered and raw. The others had cursed her, some had raised stones. Mael alone had stepped forward, breaking a sprig of leaves between her palms, laying the balm gently against the burn. Smoke poisons, balm heals, she had whispered, voice steady in the roar of hatred. She hadn't asked leave to follow them afterward. She had simply walked on when they turned from the ashes. And now she was gone. Ash drifted across the gulf like slow snow. The span groaned, rope whispering against rope. Behind him, Darian's voice cracked. She didn't even scream. Morgale's face was pale in the ashen light, her scarred skin drawn tight. She touched her arm, where Mael's balm had once cooled the burn, as if the memory itself had been cut away. Anselm bent toward the severed end, ink-stained fingers trembling. This was no failure of rope, he rasped. It was severed. The words hung in the void. Darian swallowed hard. That's too neat. Rope doesn't part like that. Morgale's voice was low, strained. Or the world itself has turned knife against us. Silence gathered like a weight. No one answered. The wind across the gulf said nothing either. Then Edrin lifted his head. His eyes moved from face to face, each shadowed by the swaying rope. Who would do such a thing? Not Darian, still pale and shaking. Not Morgale, though the villagers had once named her witch. Not Anselm, with his trembling hands. Not Ysara, whose gaze stayed fixed on the gulf, as if listening to something only she could hear. And yet the thought remained. One of us. The span creaked, straining in the wind. Beneath them the gulf waited, patient and black. "Bind the rope," Edrin said at last. His voice was iron, but his throat was dry. "No one crosses till it's made fast." No one moved at first. Darian fumbled with the coils, his hands shaking as though the cord itself might bite him. Morgale stooped to help, her scarred face unreadable. Anselm muttered fragments of scripture under his breath, each word falling like ash. Ysara whispered something softer still, her lips shaping syllables the air refused to carry. When the rope was bound again, the span swayed with a different weight. Suspicion clung heavier than the gulf. None said it aloud. None needed to. One of us had cut the rope.